We're here at Modular Summit, and I'm interviewing Mantle. What is your name, and how are you involved with Mantle?
Right. So first thing, thank you for having me. I'm Arjun. I'm the head of ecosystem at Mantle. So I've been in crypto for some time. I started in 2016. I started doing crypto. I read the Bitcoin white paper, got into that. Then I started working full time in 2020, where I joined Polygon. At the time, it was called Matic Network, and I was head of BD and growth at Polygon for about 3 years. Last November, I joined Mantle. And at Mantle, we're doing something like really very interesting where we're building a modular layer 2 stack on Ethereum, where we're using eigenlayer as data availability. And we just went live 3 days ago.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Why did you get involved with Mantle, and why do you think the modular stack is compelling?
So Mantle was born out of a DAO vote. Right, it doesn't come with VC backing, or it's not like a typical chain. Like, a DAO voted, so BitDAO voted to create a piece of infrastructure, and Mantle was born, and that's how we hired the team. So I found the genesis story very interesting. We also have access to BitDAO's funds. All of our funding comes from the DAO, and we've got about $4 billion on chain in assets which we can use to mobilize and grow the ecosystem. We also have the support of Bybit, the exchange, who can help us with listing high potential projects. So as an ecosystem play, having a very strong community in the DAO, having a piece of infrastructure, and having an exchange as well with which we can accelerate and create distribution for projects, felt like a very compelling play to me. Also, I love the 0 to 1 journey. So I'm a bit of a 0 to 1 junkie that way. So that's kind of why I wanted to start this. I think with why we chose to build modular, I think it was a very obvious choice for us. Like, if you look at just the future of how blockchains will be built, it's very clear the design is going to be modular. We've seen this kind of characteristic in Web 2 as well, where Web 2 was all about monolithic architecture. It was all about large pieces of software, and we've gone from that to today, where the entire sort of software industry is run with microservices and APIs. So we've seen modularization in Web 2 as well. And in Web 3, we will see the same, where all the different, let's say, layers within a blockchain are going to be split up into sort of different, let's say, pieces, all of which are interacting seamlessly with each other. And with every piece of that, let's say, pie, you would see then interesting innovation happening. So on the data availability side, for example, we're working with eigenlayer, but we're also actively, in conversations with Celestia, with Polygon Avail. We're looking at if it makes sense to have multiple DA layers, possibly sometime in the future. And similarly, with respect to finality, we're on Ethereum, but in terms of consensus or in terms of execution, there are so many other innovations happening in that space as well. So in the VM space, for example, Arbitrum is doing a stylus, which is a new kind of VM. Polygon is developing Miden. So that could be another space where there's multiple VMs possible for chains to use. On the finality side, on the consensus side, we're running a sequencer ourselves, but decentralized sequencers, ZK VMs, there's so much innovation happening there as well. So when you open up the layers of a blockchain, you kind of tend to also spark innovation in all of these different layers. And I think this will lead to some amazing blockchain configurations, right? Where I feel that we will get closer and closer to solving the blockchain trilemma as we continue to modularize. So I think I'm very excited about modular design philosophy.
Okay. Quick elevator pitch. What is Mantle?
All right. So Mantle is a modular layer 2 scaling solution we built on top of Ethereum. We use eigenlayer for data availability, and in terms of technology, we've gone with the modular stack. In terms of ecosystem, we have our own liquidity, we've got our own piece of infrastructure now, and we also have a closely allied exchange. So we have the ability to take a project all the way from 0 to 100, which is take a project all the way from 0 to grants to investments and all the way to listing. On the technology side, fully EVM compatible. We've gone with the OP stack, and we're running the OVM. So if you're an Ethereum developer, or if you're a Polygon developer, Arbitrum developer, Optimism developer, you're automatically a Mantle developer. So super easy to use, super fast, very low fees, and at the same time, a massive ecosystem to back it all up. So that's Mantle.
Okay, great. All right, let's talk about the technicals a little bit. So what is the direction of the ecosystem?
So this is very interesting. So in terms of technology, we just went live like 3 days ago. In terms of the technology, currently we're running OVM. So we're running the, you could say, not the Bedrock version, the OVM of the original Optimism version, which has been live for almost 18 months. We're working with EigenLayer, and we've gone live with EigenDA, Eigen Data Availability. So currently, it's a configuration which the Mantle team has put together using EigenDA's technology. I think once EigenDA goes into production later this year, then it will be sort of full-fledged run by the EigenLayer infrastructure. And I think it's so interesting, right? So when you look at the space, so there are innovations happening on the fraud-proof sort of side, where we see like compression in sort of roll-up data. So what we saw when we went from OVM to Bedrock, the gas cost, for example, on Optimism went down by 50%. So there's some interesting innovations there. We've also actively been researching ZK VMs and trying to see that in the next, let's say, evolution of a network, maybe sometime next year, it doesn't make sense for us to, go ZK. And we've been in touch with all the ZK VM teams in the space, and trying to get a sense of, suppose we have to do it, how would we do it? What's the best technology out there, which is compatible with most of the opcodes, etc. So we're doing that research. On the data availability side, we're working with EigenLayer right now, but we're also looking at all the other different stacks, trying to see how the data availability space also evolves with different configurations, with node setups, data availability committees. So some interesting kinds of ways of putting together and solving data availability. In terms of chain execution and VMs as well, like I was explaining earlier, there is now variety in the sort of VM layer. So earlier you would have possibly EVM, right? And you try to basically maybe build some customization into it. Now you can sort of build a custom VM which supports EVM and could support potentially other languages as well, which would offer more flexibility in terms of the kind of smart contracts and the kind of building you could do, right? So EVM stops being a limiter. So that's something which we're also studying, and we're trying to also actively engage with the folks at Ethereum Foundation, trying to get a sense of where EVM is heading as well. So there's like a lot going on at the same time. But we're very excited about this journey. At our core, we want to bring the best technology to market, which obviously means, we have to keep a track of everything that's happening in the space. So we have a full stack tech team, a full stack research team. We are also hiring more folks on our technical teams as well. So in the time to come, expect more interesting sort of configurations with respect to the blockchain, and as we continue to push the envelope of scalability.
Right. In terms of blockchain scalability and extensibility via the modular architecture, how do you expect to use multiple DA layers like Celestia? Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a future for using something like IBC as the communications protocol? What are your thoughts about that?
So I think IBC has been sort of the inspiration, right, for everything cross-chain in the space, right? So right from Tendermint to IBC, everybody seems to be learning from Cosmos of what has to be done. Within the EVM space, we've seen some interesting cross-chain applications now coming up, now that we have things like Layer 0, Wormhole, and I would say fast, efficient, generic message passing protocols, where you can send liquidity, NFTs, and sort of, or rather just pass messages between chains very easily. Could we, for example, use other data availability layers, and what that would look like? The reason I brought that up is because I do feel that ultimately the data availability layer also will have its own economics, right? So currently when the user pays for fees, he's paying obviously for fees on L2, fees for that transaction because it has to land up on L1 on Ethereum, but then he's also paying for the data availability cost. And what that means is, at the data availability layer, you're going to have fee generation happen over a period of time. Now, there are various ways in which you can create value in this layer, and I feel that as data availability matures as a technology, different layers will compete, not just for chains, but also for these fees from users, and ultimately could even provide, let's say, rebates in some sense, right? So you could have, for example, a situation where if, for example, we use X data availability layer, right, we could get a rebate on the data costs in sort of maybe a token or something like that. So there are going to be, different economic models at play here, and this will lead to like this kind of an arms race in the data availability layer side. So that's kind of why I feel that if you follow, let's say, pure modular design philosophy, in some sense, you want to be able to give this option to the user or to the, let's say, a smart contract developer. Does it matter so much? Would it be bound to a chain? I think we have to give it some more time before, seeing these kind of configurations. But I fully expect like a lot of competition in this sort of data availability, and not just in this layer, in all of these different layers. And this competition would mean that offering more options could potentially be better for the user in the long run. Like that's kind of what I visualize when I see how these things are evolving with time.
Okay. Last question. Where do you think the space is headed with respect to having DA layers as the norm? But if we don't solve decentralized sequencing, is it headed towards more centralization?
Spicy question. So this is very interesting, like discussion, right? And I'll try to summarize it as succinctly as I can. Do I expect more modularization? Yes, of course. Are there going to be more data availability layers in the future? Of course, right? Can we find a way to mix and match configurations and provide options? Yes, we can. But sequencers is a very interesting sort of space, because ideally, for the sake of decentralization, you would want decentralized sequencers. But in some sense, I feel it also breaks the revenue model for blockchains. So for example, if a blockchain is running a sequencer and accruing fees, the blockchain has a revenue model. Like current generation blockchains don't have very strong revenue models. And when you have a revenue model, then you can run a chain, then you can generate funds for, continuous sort of improvement. Otherwise, you're continuously gambling on the token price, right, to be able to sustain your company. Now, when you sort of decentralize the sequencers, does it break the revenue model? Or what should the revenue model of a chain look like? Ultimately, the chain has to be able to generate value in order to be able to distribute that value to its sort of token holders or potential stakers or whatever have you. So I feel that decentralized sequencers and what maybe the value accrual for the token and for the chain would be is something which is maybe not very clearly misunderstood. But I do feel that decentralization is sort of the end goal or the end state. So we would have to figure out what these economic models would look like. But should we move towards decentralization when it comes to the sequencers? Of course we should. And it's a very complex problem to solve, but I think with all the different teams now looking to solve this problem, I'm fairly confident it'll be solved quickly. So yeah.
The whole purpose of the space is for decentralization, and the reason why we need the modular stack is to scale to the next 6 billion or so users, like mainstream users, right? Everyone in the world.
Yes.
The same as almost everyone in the world has access to internet somehow. And if we're able to achieve that, then the idea is to get decentralization technology in the hands of everyone.
True.
However, the problem is if it re-centralizes, then why not just revert back to the centralized norm, which is already scalable to worldwide?
No, you're 100% right. I think it's such a fine balance, right, one has to achieve, where you need to be able to, so let me explain it in a slightly different way. Ultimately, you want value creation, and then you want equitable distribution. Like the Web2 business models create not just centralization in terms of technology, but centralization in terms of the distribution of that value. So whatever value is created, right, for example, in any network or in any business, is concentrated to a very small set of, let's say, individuals or parties, and then the rest
institutions, and then push retail to the periphery, and for retail to access it, they are gatekept by the institution. They need to onboard through the institutions.
Right, and with Web3, we want to break that. Right, so not only are we looking at collective ownership, but we are also looking at equitable distribution. Right, and which is why decentralization is so important. Right? These are the problems we are trying to solve. But at the same time, for every blockchain, right, and for every, let's say, piece of technology, you need to continuously improve it, evolve it. You need to continuously improve security. So which means that you need the ability to run, let's say, teams, right? These could be globally distributed, but in some sense, tightly knit teams whose sole focus is to ensure that this technology continues to serve the utility for which it was designed, right? So equitable distribution is important, but being able to have some model wrapped, maybe let's say within that equitable distribution, is very important, right? This is kind of where we feel is the sweet spot of how you can create this technology, continue to evolve and build it, and then continue to sustain it, right? And so that decentralization never stops. Like I would hate to be in a situation where we're not able to find these economic models, and then it becomes it becomes like all about token value, a token value sort of play, right, where token price matters the most, and then decentralization would then fail, and then people would be like, yeah, this is why you should not build this is why you should do web 2. Web 2 is the answer. So I'd hate to get there, which is kind of why we need to like collectively work together and figure out a solution to these problems.
Absolutely. And with that, thanks for coming on the podcast.
All right, thank you for having me.